Spring, a season of rebirth, hope, and silence. But sometimes that silence whispers from the graves. Ethan, Claire, Rachel, you shouldn't be here. Ethan Carter hadn't set foot in his family's old farmhouse for 20 years. The spring sun filtered through the trees, casting light over the budding branches. After his grandfather's death, the house was now his. He stood holding a rusty key, staring at the moss-covered roof and peeling paint. The old porch swing creaked softly in the mild spring breeze. Ethan felt a chill run through him, but he didn't step back. When he stepped inside, sunlight streamed through the dirty windows, illuminating the dust floating in the air. The smell of old wood and dampness hung heavy. "This house needs life again," Ethan whispered. But the silence wasn't empty. It answered him, as if the house took a deep breath. That night, the wind rattled the branches against the windows. The ceiling creaked. In the quiet of the spring night, the house felt strangely alive. In the morning, Ethan went out into the garden. The flowers had exploded in bloom, lilies, violets, and tulips covering every inch. As he pulled out the weeds, his boot struck something hard beneath the soil. He crouched down, grabbed a shovel, and began to dig. A small, flat stone emerged. Faded letters marked its surface. "Sleep, little angel." Ethan brushed away more dirt with his hand. The stone marked a tiny grave. Just then, the spring breeze suddenly picked up, sweeping through the flowers. And in the hum of the wind, for a brief moment, Ethan thought he heard it. A faint, distant sound, the cry of a baby. But it was daytime, and he was alone in the garden. That night, Ethan tried to sleep in the old bed. The cool spring air drifted in through the open window. Outside, frogs croaked, blending with the faint song of crickets. But just as he was drifting off, he heard it. A sound, very soft, very far. From the garden, a faint baby's cry. Ethan sat up, holding his breath. He walked to the window and looked out. The garden lay still under the moonlight. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze. But nothing moved. No shadows. The crying stopped. "I imagined it," he whispered. He closed the curtains and lay back down. But inside, something felt wrong. The house was quiet, but it wasn't an empty quiet. In the morning, Ethan pulled a chair next to the grave and sat, staring at the stone. Purple violets had bloomed around it, bending softly in the wind. "Who buried you here?" he asked into the silence. A few steps away, the soil looked different, darker, looser, like it had been disturbed. Ethan grabbed the shovel again and slowly began to dig. As he dug, small stones appeared beneath the soil. Round stones. They seemed arranged, forming a pattern, a boundary. Ethan paused, heart pounding. He lifted the last stone. Underneath, wrapped in old cloth, something glimmered. A small metal rattle. Rusted. But when he picked it up, it made a faint sound. And at that exact moment, the crying returned. Ethan held the rattle in his hand, feeling its cold metal pressing into his palm. The wind moved through the flowers, carrying a soft hum, like whispers hidden in the breeze. He closed his eyes, listening, and then the rattle moved, very gently, shaking by itself, though no one touched it. He jerked back, dropping it onto the dirt. Slowly, he stepped away toward the house, but behind him, the rattle chimed again. He turned. It wasn't where he left it. It had rolled further, deeper into the flowers. "No," he whispered, and then, from the corner of his eye, a shadow. Small, crouching among the flowers, watching him. That night, Ethan locked every door. He shut every curtain, but the quiet inside was heavy. The sound came again, not from outside. This time, from right outside his window. The faint rattle. Ethan stepped slowly toward the curtain. His hand trembled. He pulled it back and saw a foggy handprint on the glass. Nothing outside, but the print wasn't from inside. Suddenly, the rattle went silent, and from above, from the attic, a baby's cry. Ethan froze. The attic had always been locked, and he had no key, but that sound, soft, distant it was coming from there. He walked to the attic door. Each step brought the crying closer, and when he stood before the door, the sound stopped. Ethan stood at the attic door, swallowing hard. A thin light glowed beneath the crack, but there were no lights up there, and no one had opened it. Yet, the door slowly creaked open from the inside. The hinges groaned, revealing darkness beyond. A cold breath drifted out, and the crying began again. He stepped inside, holding a flashlight. The attic was filled with dust and cobwebs. Old chairs, wooden trunks, piles of forgotten things. And in the center, a crib. Empty, except for the rattle, lying inside. Ethan moved closer. The rattle rocked by itself. Then, from the shadows beside the crib, a pair of eyes appeared. Small, black, watching. The eyes stared at him. Ethan froze. He raised the flashlight, but when the light reached the spot, nothing. Only an old baby blanket crumpled on the floor. And then the rattle lifted off the crib and fell. The sound was closer now. And then tiny footsteps, bare feet, running in circles around the crib, echoing in the dark. Suddenly, the door behind him slammed shut. Ethan spun around, shining the light at the door. It wouldn't budge. Locked. He wasn't alone. A breath touched his neck. Slowly, he turned. His chest tightened. His eyes narrowed. In the darkness, a small figure stepped forward, and a whisper filled his ear. "You woke me up." The flashlight flickered, then went out. Darkness swallowed everything. The darkness felt heavy around Ethan. The flashlight was dead. The attic swallowed every sound. But inside the silence, there were whispers. Soft, broken. Words he couldn't understand. Ethan stepped back, feeling blindly. Then a quiet giggle rose from beneath his feet, and a cold hand grabbed his wrist. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The small figure moved closer, its dark eyes locked on him. Ethan pulled free and ran to the door. It wouldn't open. Footsteps approached from behind. Then, right by his ear, the rattle. Its faint chime. Ethan pounded on the door. "Let me out," he cried. Suddenly, the door swung open. Ethan ran downstairs, out the front door, and into the yard. But the garden had changed. The flowers were wilted, the soil dry and cracked, the bright colors of spring gone. In the middle of the yard, the small gravestone was missing, and where it once stood, an open hole remained. Ethan stepped back, then a small hand reached out from the hole. In its palm, the old, rusted rattle. The hand slowly shook it. The sound filled the air. Ethan stood frozen, and the hand slowly withdrew. Later that morning, neighbors found Ethan sitting by the hole, silent, staring, the rattle still clutched in his hand. From that day on, Ethan never spoke again. The spring sun warmed the small town as Rachel stepped out of her small house, breathing in the fresh air. It was her day off, and she felt a rare sense of freedom. Today, she had one goal: to visit the old field outside town and pick wildflowers before they disappeared. As she walked down the dusty road, she passed Mr. Harlan sitting outside his old hardware store. "You heading to that old field?" he asked, frowning beneath his cap. Rachel smiled. "Yeah, just for some flowers." "Be careful, kid," he muttered, watching her walk away. Rachel shrugged off his warning. Soon she reached the field, and it was stunning. Waves of purple, yellow, and white wildflowers stretched endlessly, swaying in the breeze. She stepped into the sea of color, letting the petals brush her hands as she picked the brightest ones. But then she noticed something strange. Small, smooth stones half buried in the dirt, each with a shallow dent in the center. They almost looked like eyes. Curious, Rachel bent down and picked one up. It felt strangely warm in her hand, though the sun wasn't that strong. She frowned but slipped it into her backpack anyway. With her bouquet of flowers, she turned back as the sun began to set. The breeze cooled, the flowers swayed gently behind her. She didn't notice the faint warmth still pulsing from inside her bag. When Rachel got home, the sky was already darkening. She placed the flowers in a vase on the kitchen table and dropped her backpack onto the counter. As she tried to shake off the day's tiredness, she noticed something odd. The zipper on her backpack looked slightly open. She leaned closer and saw that the stone felt warm inside. A small shiver crawled up her spine. "It's just leftover heat from the sun," she whispered to herself. That night, as Rachel lay in bed, the wind whispered against the windows. Just as she was about to drift off, she heard a faint scraping sound, a thin, dragging noise, like something sliding slowly across the floor. She sat up, scanning the dark corners of her room, but saw nothing. Probably the wind, she told herself, closing her eyes again. But as soon as she shut them, the sound came again, closer this time, right beneath her bed. The next morning, Rachel woke to find a mark on the floor. A thin, black line stretched from beneath her bed all the way to the door. She bent down, inspecting it, and realized it wasn't a mark. It was a thin black thread. She reached out to pull it, but it slipped under the door, vanishing out of sight. Unease crept in her chest. When she turned to look at the vase, she noticed a few black threads hanging down from the flowers as well. Rachel hurried out of the house and went straight to Mrs. Abernathy's, one of the town's oldest residents. When the old woman opened the door, Rachel showed her the stone. Mrs. Abernathy's face turned pale. Where did you get this, child?" she asked shakily. "From the flower field," Rachel replied quietly. The old woman's fingers trembled as she traced a shaky sign over the stone. "You went into that field?" Her eyes widened in fear. "They're waking up," she whispered. That night, Rachel tried to sleep with a cloth draped over the stone. But deep into the night, she noticed a faint glow leaking from her backpack. Her eyes adjusted to the dark, and she realized the glow was coming from inside the stone's hollow center. The light pulsed softly, like a heartbeat, and with each pulse, the zipper of her backpack lifted slightly higher, as if something inside was slowly trying to push its way out. Rachel woke up the next morning, exhausted and restless. The events of the previous night weighed heavily on her mind. As she sat in the kitchen, her eyes drifted to the vase of flowers. The black threads had multiplied. They now hung down from the stems, nearly touching the floor. Rachel cautiously reached out and took one between her fingers. It was cold and faintly vibrating. She pulled her hand back quickly. She couldn't ignore this anymore. With growing unease, she grabbed her bag and headed to the town library. She needed answers, something about the eye stones or the black threads. Scanning the dusty shelves, she finally stumbled upon an old, yellowed magazine containing a local legend. The eyes in the field wait for the day to awaken. The eyes turn to stone. The stones weave the threads. The threads slowly return home. Rachel's stomach dropped. Return home. The words echoed in her mind as she rushed out of the library. Outside, the sky had started to darken, clouds gathering ominously above. By the time she reached home, the wind had picked up. She ran inside and went straight to the vase. The black threads had grown longer, spreading across the floor like a thin spiderweb. As she stepped closer, she noticed the threads quivering softly with each of her footsteps. Drawing near, she noticed one of the threads slowly pulling itself upward, as if being reeled in by something unseen. Her heart pounded in her chest. Looking into the vase, she realized the flowers were wilting, their petals turning black. In the center of the bouquet, the black threads were moving, they were writhing on their own. Suddenly, a faint whispering came from her backpack. Rachel turned toward it, watching as the zipper slowly slid open. From within, the whisper grew louder. "See us, see us." She stepped back in fear. A dim glow began leaking from inside the bag. The stone was glowing again. The light grew stronger, casting a shadow on the wall, and the shadow slowly began to move. Rachel stood frozen, staring at the shadow on the wall. The glow from her backpack cast a shape that was moving. Long, thin fingers, a hunched shoulder, a headless silhouette. The light flickered, and the shadow vanished. And then, a whisper brushed directly against her ear. "We're here now." She stumbled backward, afraid to look at the backpack. but the zipper slid open a little more on its own. Black threads slowly slithered out, merging with the ones already spread across the floor, weaving into a web-like pattern. Rachel's breath quickened. Her gaze dropped to under the bed. Some of the threads were being pulled beneath it. Something was there. Something was calling them. Suddenly, a noise echoed from the kitchen. Something had fallen. Rachel rushed in and found the vase shattered on the floor. The flowers were pitch black. On the wall above, thread-like shapes of eyes had formed. One eye in the center had a hollow, just like the stone's indentation. From that hollow, it felt like a silent scream was spilling into the room. Rachel's head began to spin. A low growl sounded behind her. She turned just in time to see the kitchen door closing on its own. Black threads were sliding under the door. The lights flickered once and went out. The kitchen was swallowed in total darkness. Fumbling blindly, Rachel found a lighter in a drawer. She flicked it on, and in that tiny flame's glow, two black eyes gleamed back at her. Eyes belonging to a shadowed figure crawling slowly toward her from the corner. She dropped the lighter and ran to the door. But a wall of woven black threads had formed, blocking her way. She pounded and kicked, but the threads wouldn't give. The sound behind her grew closer. A whisper crept in her ear. "Give us your eyes, your eyes." Rachel grabbed the glowing stone from her backpack and threw it. It soared through the air, hitting the woven wall. At that moment, a blinding flash of light exploded across the room, and Rachel realized everything had gone silent. When Rachel opened her eyes, she found herself lying on the floor. The room was silent. For a brief moment, she thought it had all been a dream. But when she lifted her head, she saw burnt black thread marks on the floor. The walls still smelled of smoke, but the eye shapes were gone. She looked at the vase. It was empty. The flowers had all disappeared. She tried to sit up, to stand, but she couldn't. Suddenly, the entire room was swallowed by darkness again. Rachel opened her eyes and realized she was in a hospital room. A white ceiling, the smell of antiseptic, and 4 drip was attached to her arm. As a nurse left the room, the doctor walked in. "Rachel, you're finally awake," he said gently. "How are you feeling?" Rachel didn't know how to answer. It felt like a knot was stuck in her throat. Her mind was still filled with the threads, shadows, and eyes she had seen that night. The doctor sat down on the chair beside the bed. "They found you unconscious in town. In your house, there were some strange things. The walls were covered in scratches, burnt pieces of thread on the floor, but no other signs." Rachel's heart started racing. "The stone?" she whispered. The doctor lowered his head. "We did find a stone in your bag, yes, but just an ordinary stone. Nothing unusual, no special markings." Rachel slowly sat up. She looked out the window and saw the hospital garden. Among the grass, something small and black was shining. She squinted, a stone with a small hollow in the center. Her pulse quickened. She placed her hands on the blanket, and that's when she noticed her hands were trembling. The doctor handed Rachel some medication. "These will help calm your mind," he said. Rachel took the pills, but her gaze never left the window. She could see thin black threads moving around the stone in the garden. "It's there too," she whispered. The doctor turned his eyes to her. "What are you seeing, Rachel?" Rachel stayed silent, because at that moment, she watched the threads climbing up a tree near the stone. That evening, a visitor came to Rachel's room. An old woman holding a prayer book. "Someone from your family sent me," she said. When the woman's eyes met Rachel's, Rachel felt a chill. Around the woman's neck hung a necklace with the same stone. The hollow in its center. The woman smiled. "Your eyes are strong, child," she whispered softly. And as the nurse closed the door, Rachel saw thin black threads forming in the nurse's shadow. Claire stepped through the gates of the old Whitmore estate, feeling the soft warmth of the spring sun on her face. The garden stretched before her, wildflowers growing untamed across the land. Violets, daffodils, and tulips covered everything. But the silence between the flowers felt unsettling. Claire had been hired by the grandson of Eleanor Whitmore. "We want the garden restored to its former glory," he had told her. But to Claire, it felt less like a garden and more like a graveyard. She walked down the old stone path toward the back garden. The weeds reached up to her knees. In the center stood an old well. Its stones were covered in moss. The iron lid was rusted shut. Claire pulled out a copy of the garden's original plans from her bag. The well wasn't marked anywhere. Why is this not included? She wondered. A soft breeze passed through. She thought she heard a faint whisper from the flowers. She looked up, scanning the yard. No one was there. She put on her gloves and grabbed a trowel. The soil near the old stone wall looked looser than the rest. She started digging. At first, only dry roots and rock surfaced. But after a few shovelfuls, her trowel hit something metal. Claire knelt down. She brushed the dirt away with her hands. A rusted medallion emerged, its chain broken, the surface worn. She held it up. There was a letter engraved on it. E. Claire turned the medallion over. Nothing else was marked on the back. Just then, a faint sound came from the direction of the well. Claire looked over. The well remained closed, but between the stones, it sounded like a soft humming was rising. Claire stood up. The breeze shifted again. The flowers all bent in the same direction. And in that moment, Claire heard something carried by the wind. A whisper. It sounded like it was calling her name. Claire held the medallion tightly as she walked back toward the well. The hum was gone. The silence had returned. But something about the well pulled her closer. She stood beside it, brushing her fingers across the cold stone. The lid was sealed, rust covering every inch. She tried lifting it, but it wouldn't budge. Beneath her feet, the grass felt damp, almost soft. She stepped back. Something about this spot felt wrong. She decided to keep digging near the old stone wall. Her trowel scraped against the soil, cutting deeper with every stroke. Then another sound, a clink of metal against metal. She pushed aside the dirt with her hands. Another object emerged, a small rusted key. Claire's heart pounded. She wiped the key clean with her glove. It felt heavier than it looked. She glanced back at the well. Could the key fit the lid? The wind picked up. The flowers around her swayed again. A whisper carried through the breeze. Claire. Her name. Soft, distant, but clear. Claire froze. Her eyes scanned the garden. Shadows stretched longer across the yard. The sun had begun to set. She gripped the key tighter. Somewhere, deep beneath the earth, she imagined something waiting. Something that had been buried for a very long time. Claire walked back to the well. She knelt beside it, running her hands along the iron lid. Then she found it, a small keyhole hidden beneath a layer of rust. She brought the key closer. It fit perfectly. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she turned it. A loud click echoed through the garden. The lid shifted slightly. From beneath the well cover, a cold draft escaped. And with it, a faint whisper rose again. Claire. Claire slowly pushed the lid open. The rusted metal groaned as it moved. A cold wind rushed against her face. Inside, there was only darkness. A deep, endless black. Claire leaned over, peering into the well. Her eyes struggled to adjust. Then she saw it. A faint, glowing dot deep below. Then another. Like eyes. Claire stepped back. Her heart pounded, but she could not look away. Suddenly, a sound echoed from inside. A scraping noise like metal against stone. Then a slow, dragging scratch. Claire moved closer to the edge. From the darkness, a thin line rose upward. Something was climbing the stone wall. Claire held her breath. A hand, a pale, bony hand reached out from the shadows. Claire screamed and stumbled back. The hand gripped the edge. Its nails were cracked. Its skin was dry and torn. Slowly, it pulled upward. More sounds came from the well. Whispers, murmurs, like pieces of an old, broken song. Claire took a step back. The hand dangled over the edge. Then another hand appeared. Claire turned and ran toward the door. But the door was locked. A shadow moved between the flowers. A low hum filled the garden. From inside the well, a soft voice whispered, "You forgot me." Claire pulled at the doorknob. "Let me out," she shouted. But the door would not open. A foot stepped out of the well. then a shoulder. A dark figure climbed over the stones. Its face remained hidden in the shadows. Claire pressed her back against the door. The figure stepped into the garden. Flowers wilted where it passed. Slowly, it raised its head. Its eyes were completely black, and it smiled. The figure moved slowly through the garden. With each step, the flowers wilted and turned to ash. Claire stood trembling behind the door. The figure slowly turned its head toward her. Its eyes glinted for a brief moment in the darkness. Claire pounded on the door. "Let me out," she shouted, but the door would not open. A low hum rose from the direction of the well. The figure's steps quickened. It was coming closer. Claire turned around. She looked at the window beside the door. Through the glass, she saw the figure gliding across the ground, leaving no trace. Its feet did not touch the soil. The figure returned to the well. It leaned over the lid. With its hands, it lifted the rusted cover. Claire watched in horror. From the darkness, a second figure emerged. Small, hunched, and bent. Claire's throat tightened. Now there were two shadows in the garden. Footsteps echoed outside the door. Claire stepped closer. A shadow seeped under the door. A whisper filled her ear. "Let us in." Claire backed away. She clutched the medallion in her hand. The chain dug into her skin. Black liquid began to drip from under the door. It spread across the stone floor. Claire took another step back. The liquid slowly crept toward the medallion. Suddenly, a hand appeared at the door's edge. Long, thin, bony fingers gripped the frame. The nails were black and cracked. The hand slowly slid upward. It touched the top of the door, then the window's edge. Claire began to cry softly. "Please go away," she whispered. But the hand did not retreat. As the liquid touched the medallion's chain, the medallion began to glow. Heat spread through Claire's palm, and the door creaked open. The door slowly opened. Claire stepped outside, gripping the medallion tightly. The garden was silent. The flowers had wilted. The well was closed. No figures were in sight, but on the ground in the mud there were bare footprints. Small, thin footprints. Claire followed them. It led all the way to the well. The lid was shut, but the lock was open. Claire knelt down. Hanging from the rusty chain was another medallion, identical to hers. Claire lifted the lid of the well. She peered into the darkness. A metal box hung from a rope inside. She pulled it up. Inside was an old journal. On the cover, it read Eleanor W. Claire flipped through the pages. Notes, dates, mentions of buried memories in the garden. Eleanor had written about items she'd buried herself and family sins. Claire's hand trembled. One sentence caught her eye. The whispers in the garden, but they are only voices from the past. Claire closed the journal. She looked out at the garden. Moonlight lit the soil. The flowers gently swayed in the breeze. Claire glanced at the medallion in her hand. The same letter, the same date. Then she noticed something. On the back of the medallion, another date was engraved. 1956, the same as the photograph. Claire took a deep breath. Maybe, years ago, Eleanor had buried the family's secrets here. And now, Claire had brought them back. She turned and walked toward the door, but she paused. She looked back at the well one last time. On the lid, in the mud, was a handprint. Small, but was it really there? Or just the shape of the mud? Claire closed the door. Her eyes filled with tears, and then a faint hum rose from the garden, blending with the wind. A whisper, or maybe just the breeze. Claire walked away without looking back. The garden fell quiet again.